All right, let's break down a landmark piece of legislation in Indian history, the Indian Council Act of 1861. This act is a really big deal, and we're going to unpack exactly why.
But to really get why this Act of 1861 was so important, we have to rewind a bit, back to the one event that changed everything, the Great Revolt of 1857.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the aftermath of the revolt. Then we'll jump into the new administrative setup, see how the central legislature was changed, touch on decentralization, and finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the real power, the limitations, and the legacy of this whole thing.
All right, first up, Section 1. Let's really set the stage and understand the political climate that made this new act absolutely necessary. You see, the 1857 revolt wasn't just a skirmish. It was a massive earthquake that completely shook the foundations of British rule. It sent a crystal-clear message. The old way of doing things, with the East India Company in charge, was totally broken. So what did the British Parliament do? They stepped in with the Government of India Act of 1858, kicking the company out and putting the British Crown directly in charge. And that massive change, well, it needed a whole new rulebook, a whole new administrative machine. And that's exactly what led to the Act of 1861. So here's the key takeaway. The British government, now calling the shots directly, realized they needed to change their strategy. They figured, hey, maybe if we involve Indians in the process, even a little, we can prevent another massive uprising. It was all about creating a sort of safety valve for public grievances. Okay, so with that background settled, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the new administrative framework. The first big changes happened right at the top, inside the Viceroy's own Executive Council. First off, the top job's title gets an upgrade from Governor General to Viceroy after the 58 Act. And his council, it got bigger. But honestly, the number of members wasn't the real story here. The real game changer was how this council started to work. And this right here, this is a huge deal, especially for anyone studying Indian polity. The act brought in something called the portfolio system. You can think of it as the baby steps towards a modern cabinet government. Each council member was put in charge of a specific department, home, law, revenue, finance. All of a sudden, the administration got a whole lot more organized and efficient. Okay, now this is fascinating. The Act introduced a super powerful tool that, believe it or not, still exists today, the ordinance. This basically gave the Viceroy the power to make laws all by himself. During an emergency, no need to even ask the Legislative Council. And make no mistake, this wasn't some minor little power. It meant the Viceroy could act instantly and on his own authority. And these laws he created, they weren't just for a day or two. They could stay in effect for a full 6 months. That's a lot of power. And this is where you can really see the long shadow of this act. That idea of the ordinance, it's a direct ancestor of a power found in the modern Indian Constitution. Of course, the context is totally different now. It's gone from being a tool for colonial control to a feature within a democratic system. But the DNA is right there. All right, let's shift gears and look at the lawmaking body itself, the central legislature. This is where some of the most visible and, frankly, most debated changes took place. So what they did was expand the old legislative body by adding what they called additional members. The Viceroy got to pick somewhere between 6 and 12 of these folks, and they'd serve for 2 years. Now, here's the big headline. For the very first time, the door was officially opened for Indians to be part of this group, nominated as non-official members. And here they are, the 3 men who walked through that door first. In 1862, the Viceroy, Lord Canning, nominated these 3 prominent Indians to his council. This was a historic moment, the first time Indians were formally brought into the high-level lawmaking process of British India. But, and this is a huge but, we have to be really clear about something. This new council was more for show than for go. Its powers were incredibly limited. I mean, think about it. They couldn't talk about the budget, couldn't ask the executive any tough questions, and had zero say in how the administration was actually run. It was a legislature in name, but not really in function.
Okay, so this act wasn't just about creating new things. It also hit the reverse button on a long-standing British policy. It kicked off the process of what we call legislative decentralization. For decades, the trend had been going in the opposite direction. The Charter Act of 1833, for example, had stripped provincial governments like Bombay and Madras of their power to make laws, centralizing everything. Well, this 1861 Act did a complete U-turn. It started handing those legislative powers right back to the provinces.
And this wasn't just a one-off thing for Bombay and Madras. This new policy of decentralization set the stage for creating brand new legislative councils in other major provinces over the next few decades. Places like Bengal, the Northwest Frontier Province, and Punjab all got their own.
So after all that, what's the bottom line? When you put all the pieces together, what was the real impact of this act? Let's take a hard look at the actual power structure it created. Yeah, despite all the talk of new councils and Indian members, this really tells you everything you need to know about who was in charge. The Legislative Council, they had almost no real power. The Viceroy, he had a ton of power, including the all-important veto. But the ultimate boss, the one with absolute authority, was the Secretary of State for India, a British cabinet minister sitting comfortably in London who could strike down any law he didn't like. And it gets even worse for the council. Their ability to even propose laws was tied up in knots. If you wanted to introduce a bill about anything important, we're talking money, the military, religion, foreign policy, you couldn't even start the conversation without getting the Viceroy's permission first. This basically guaranteed that all the important stuff stayed firmly in British hands. And all of this leads us to the big central question you have to ask about this act. Was it a genuine first step towards giving Indians a real voice and self-government, or was it just a clever illusion, a strategic move to make it look like they were including Indians, all while tightening the screws of imperial control? That, right there, is the key puzzle to think about.